Nice to meet you all. My name is Ed. You can call me Ed as well. I'm going to be talking to you about a very incredibly broad topic, which is called self-sovereign identity. I'm going to scope it for you. So I'm going to tell you about 4 things today. First, I'm going to tell you the story of Alice. It's going to be a short story, so don't worry. And then I'm going to talk to you about 2 new standards. The first one is going to be decentralized identifiers. The first one, sorry. And the second one is going to be verifiable claims. And then I'm going to sketch to you 2 use cases using these 2 particular standards so that you can understand what they're used for. Okay, let's begin. Meet Alice. Alice is just a regular person. She lives her life happily, but she gets approached by a friend who tells her about this great new online service. This new online service is called Mugbook, and this friend tells her all about it. It's this new service where you can share stuff with your friends. You can share stories about your life. You can share pictures. You can share just about anything you ever like with your friend. So she happily tries it. So this is what the service allows you to do. She goes through the registration process, which we usually go through with every service that we want to use. And she puts in a new username, a new password, like we always do with everything that we do online. And bam, she's online. So she starts doing exactly what the service is made for. She starts sharing photos, happy moments, important life events, maybe talks about her thoughts about important issues of the day. And her friends do the exact same. They all share their thoughts there on important issues, or less important issues for that matter. They post their photos, what they're doing with their life. But the thing is, Alice's whole life is not only online, of course. She has, at least if everything's okay. She also has different things she does. She has a family. She has a house. She has a car. She has a job, if everything's okay as well. She has to manage her taxes. She manages her insurance, and all of this requires the same exact thing, especially in the world of today, right? It requires usually a username and a password, maybe other authentication methods. 2-factor is also applied sometimes, if they really want to be fancy. So to mitigate this kind of ever-growing too many passwords problem, Alice can do one of 2 things. She can either use one password for everything, which is, by the way, what most of us do, or she can use a password keeper, because, well, some of us like it, and it's very, very useful. But the bright minds, that some of you might be sitting right here, of the tech world, have decided that they will do something very, very useful for Alice, which is now she can use her Mugbook and Ogle identity. I'm going to call Google Ogle because it's funny. She can use her Mugbook and Ogle identity to log into almost any service that she wishes, right? She can just use 1, maybe 2 username and password tuples to log in everywhere she wants and be authenticated as that. But she soon notices that this is kind of a double-edged sword. So she goes and buys some socks, like we all do, at this amazing website called rainforest.com. And she notices that all of a sudden, Ogle and Mugbook start showing her advertisements, right? They start showing her advertisements about socks. That's strange, she thinks. How come Ogle knows that I've bought some socks? And do they know, in fact, is this just a coincidence? So her daughter was meaning to get into ice skating. And so she tries this hypothesis, right? She buys some new ice skates, and suddenly she gets bombarded by exactly the same advertisements, but now for ice skates. Okay, so it really is the case. So she now knows that Ogle, in some way, manages to know what she's buying at rainforest.com and actually advertise to her using that kind of information. Alice thinks this is very weird. Alice doesn't like it, as most of us really don't, and feel very uncomfortable about it. But we keep on going with our lives anyway, because we can't stop suddenly using these services. These services are very important to us. I, for one, do think this is kind of a problem, and kind of a deeper problem at that. You do not own your identity, right? Who owns your identity, especially if you use one of these services, is them. They own your identifiers online, and not only that, they kind of own the flow of information of this identity. They get to show whomever they want the information about what you do online. So what do we do about this? Do we just sit back, relax, and let the tech overlords take over? That's certainly an option. But I, for one, do think this is a solvable problem. But for a problem of this size, you will need to state it first. And that's really half of the battle. So let's do that. So Alice is not in control over her identity. That's something we've established so far. And Alice is not in control over the flow of information about what she does online either. So now that we've stated this problem, we need to find a way to solve it. And the basic building block of any identity system is an identifier, right? Is something, a number that you can assign to a person or a machine, really, it doesn't really matter, to identify this particular person. So, fortunately, I'm not the only one thinking about these things, and the W3C, if you're not familiar, it's the World Wide Web Consortium, has thought of a new standard, and this standard is the DID, the decentralized identifier. This is well, it seems strange, but it really is a really simple identifier, right? It has three main components. The first one just says it's a DID. It's for machine readable purposes. Second one is the method of the DID. I'll come back to what this actually means later. And this is the so-called specific ID string. This is the most important part because it identifies, it is globally unique in the space of the DID method, right? These DID methods are very important because they can be fashioned for every single system that you like. This kind of identifier is useless if it doesn't resolve to anything, right? So this identifier resolves to something called a DID document. And multiple methods can be fashioned to do this exact thing, but the ones that, let's say, are more suited to the problem of identity are decentralized systems, right? Ones that you can keep ownership of this particular identifier. So that's where the blockchain part of my talk comes in, and this will be the only part where you actually hear about blockchain here. It allows users to keep control over a specific string, right? They own their address in this case. And there are no third parties in the mix. So you, and really only you, control that particular identifier. I told you about did documents, right? This mysterious little thing. By the way, if you're interested in any one of these, the top left is Uport. It's a system based off of Ethereum. The lower left one is Sovereign. The upper one is Occam. The lower one is Verus1, and the right one is Elastria, a Spanish consortium. And they all have fashioned did methods so that you can actually resolve did documents out of these strings. But you're obviously not going to implement these specifications all by yourself. So if you like to see some of them and play around, know what we're talking about, then you might want to visit this little website. So what is a did document exactly? Because an identifier is useless in and of itself. Here's the fun part, right? So this is just JSON, okay? And there's only really a couple of important things here. The first one identifies what kind of did this document pertains to. What is the did it pertains to? In this case, did example 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, F, G, I. And it defines ways in which you can authenticate as this particular decentralized identifier. So it contains within it keys. Right? Are you all familiar with the concept of public key encryption? Or cryptography, really? Okay, decent amount of you. So this particular type of key is an RSA type. Who controls this key, which is also something that could be important in any system, is this did, and the actual value of the key. And the third one, which is services, are services that you can use to interact with this particular did, right? So let's say you might want to add a new key. Okay, and then you add this new public key to this list of authentication mechanisms, and you have a new one. Okay, I'm very sorry. So these dids and these documents are, and you might have noticed that there's nothing here that actually says something about the subject of the did, right? Zero. The only thing that you have is authentication mechanisms and services to interact with it. But in any sort of identity system, we might also want to say something about the subject of this particular did. Otherwise, it's absolutely useless. Like, I can't say that you're named Bart. I can't say that your age is maybe 18 plus or not. I can't say anything. So fortunately for us, the W3C have thought of another standard for this exact thing. The standards are loosely coupled from one another, did and verifiable claims, but they become really, really powerful once you couple them together. Again, huge JSON document, not really huge. I can think of way larger ones, but also just has a few important things. Ooh, that's way too dark, I'm sorry. Okay, so it tells us what kind of claim this is over what exactly. In this case, we're talking about a university degree. It tells us something about who issued this particular claim. So who is saying something about whatever. And it says who the credential subject is. So in this case, the identifier might remind ourselves that it doesn't need to be a did, but better if it is, in my opinion. In this case, our previous did is the one that we're claiming something about, and we're claiming that he has a degree, and this degree is a bachelor degree, a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. But how the hell do we prove that that particular issuer was the one that actually issued this claim? Because I could just write this JSON document up and everything's fine. So this proof is a very particular kind of proof. So whenever anyone wants to verify that this was indeed issued by the one that we say that it was issued by, especially when you're talking about DIDs, the only thing that you need to do is use the particular method that was used to store the DID document for that issuer. You need to resolve that document, and you see all the keys that it has. For if everything's okay, you'll probably have a key that can be used for signatures, electronic signatures. Are all of you familiar with this concept? Most of you, again, awesome. When this particular credential was created, and this particular type of signature is an RSA signature, the creator is the first key of the very important university DID. Nonce, you might know why this is used, but it's pretty much to prevent replay attacks, right? And the signature value. So now we're armed with two very, very important weapons. That first weapon is that Alice, the one that we were talking about before, can now really, really own a particular identifier. She's the one that owns it. And we can now also verify the provenance, right, and integrity of any claim about any identifier. These are the weapons with which we are armed. So what do we do with this? Right? I mean, okay, so we've defined a set of tools, but they might not be particularly useful or not have any applicability. So let's try our hand at a use case. First use case, registration and authentication. Okay, so this is the normal use case for pretty much any IAM mechanism, right? It's registering, authenticating with the service. So Alice wants to authenticate with this particular service. That's represented by that awesome picture of a server. But this server really needs a name, right? The server really needs a name from Alice, and it won't do that she generates a claim over this name. It needs to come from somebody else. And somebody else that this particular service trusts. Because trust is the whole heart of any sort of identity system, right? Well, usually the most trusted authority for the generation of claims over somebody's name, right, would be some sort of governmental institution. This governmental institution, in this case in the Netherlands, like the password authority, RVD, if I'm not mistaken, well, then let's do exactly that. Alice is known with this particular institution. She authenticates using one of those keys that that particular institution can resolve whenever they like. She asks for a claim over her name, so one of those verifiable claims that she made before, we talked about before. She passes it through to the service. The service can now verify the provenance of this claim, and they know that it comes from an institution that they trust. She can authenticate, and now the server really, really knows that she's named Alice, as far as the passport authority, let's say, in the Netherlands is concerned. And the only thing that was required here were our tools for decentralized identity, right? And a unilateral trust relationship. Remind yourselves that they'd never talked. Never. This is important because this kind of prevents the kind of stuff that we were talking about before, which is the sharing of unneeded information between services. Okay, I mean, this might not seem particularly useful, but this is almost exactly what everything in the internet does, right? Any single authentication mechanism does the exact same thing. If you go from pure username password to all the way to OpenID, this is the way that this works. Except most of the time, there is actually something between that particular institution and the service that you're trying to access. There is some communication. In this way, that did not happen. And in fact, we have particular laws right now that can prevent this from happening in the first place. Let's try our hand at another one, right? Very simple one. Alice needs to prove that she's 18. So she goes to this is, by the way, the example that's used everywhere because it's very complete. If you go to a grocery store and you want to buy, let's say, a bottle of vodka, if you really like vodka, you go, and in most countries, they require you to present some proof of age, right? What we usually do is we present them our identity cards. We just show it to them. Hey, here it is. They look at your birth date. If they're really nice, they won't look at your name, and maybe in some countries you actually have your address on there. But that's all they need, really. They need to know that you're of age. They don't even need to know your birth date. They need to know that you're, in the case of the Netherlands, at least since, 4 years ago? I don't remember. 18. You need to be at least 18. So they say really want that proof from Alice. Well, the password authority is the same in this case, so she really does the exact same dance. She presents the claim to the cashier at the registry, and she can now buy her alcoholic beverage or cigarettes if she's really into that. And the only thing, again, that was required, and no communication, so the government, let's say, doesn't know that Alice bought a bottle of vodka, which is kind of important if you ask me. Like, you don't want the government to know that you're an alcoholic. Okay. It's better if they don't. So this was a bunch of information, right? What do you think about this? Do you have any questions so far? Because can you think of any system that would not work in this kind of structure? Yeah?
People who don't trust the government.
It's a good one. So how about you substitute that institution? And by the way, what exactly is, why is the government in there exactly? I mean, they're only there because we need a trusted party, right? Somebody who can verify, somebody that we trust to be knowledgeable about Alice's identity stuffs, about Alice's identity credentials. I mean, that entity can be substituted by really 3 of Alice's friends, 4 of Alice's friends, however many this person likes, or any other institution that this particular shop trusts to generate claims over Alice's identity. So, and by the way, at no point whatsoever was there communication between that service there and government. So even if you don't trust the government, which in general I might be a fan of, at least at face value, that's not really required because you do trust them to have their stuff about you in order. That is their job. In fact, if that wasn't happening, at least in countries that do this right now. So this might work entirely differently in countries that are torn by war, or third world countries like Zimbabwe, or now Venezuela that are having huge crashes. But in general, this works, right? And even if you are in a situation where in the future your government suddenly denies you the right to these claims, you have proof that they have generated these claims before. Cryptographic proof, in fact. So it's not unfalsifiable, but it's at least really, really, really hard to falsify. Trust me, I've tried. It's, it's almost impossible. I mean, we could go nuts with this, but I really want to leave you to your questions right now, since all of these systems are the exact same. This little triangle, by the way, if you come from anywhere like mathematics, physics, you might know that the triangle is one of the few shapes in 2D space that can cover the entirety of space, right? And what that means in this particular case is that this scheme is complete. There is no identity scheme that you can think of that doesn't fit in here. There's no permissioning mechanism, there's no IAM that could not be done that could not be done with this. Do you have anything more general to ask?
Yeah, the cashier system now has to have a list of trusted parties.
Yes.
While currently it only has to trust Google, for instance. How is that?
The cashier system. I hope they don't trust Google, but well, in the future, how it actually might work is that people have a number of trusted authorities that they trust. For example, for the cashier thing, you might actually have the list of all the world's governments, because at that point it doesn't really matter which government is asserting that you are 18 plus years old. It just matters that one of these people that you trust has your identity stuff generates one of these claims. So yes, you would have to have a list of those.
Yeah, so more administration on the side of the service.
It depends on what kind of service you're asking for, yes, but let's say that you give me an example of something more complicated, where you think this administration really might become overbearing, because as far as I can see, it's just, okay, I have a particular list of parties I trust. These are the DIDs of the parties that I trust. At any point in time, I can just resolve the keys of these and see if it was generated by one of these keys. And that's it. And this administration is once. You only do this once. You maintain a little database of these. And that's it.
Yeah, because you have only, in some cases you only want an ID actually, like Google provides now. And in other cases you also need certain claims.
Yeah.
That's also a difference.
You need certain claims about the person that you're interacting with, right?
Name or the age or...
Yeah. In the case of Google authentication, you might actually have noticed that whenever you do that, you're presented with an OAuth screen, so that you can actually say what kind of stuff you want to share with the service you're logging in with. So yes, they do kind of require that from you, and they're trusting now Google for that, or Facebook for that. There's no, I think Finland might have one of these systems, but I don't think so. Yes, sorry. Yes. So these identifiers, right? There is nothing preventing you from generating an infinite amount of these. So I think that's already the answer to your question. But if you want it more detailed, really the only thing that needs to happen is, if you want your activities online to be uncorrelatable, let's say, you can either use a browser like Tor if you're insane, or you can log in with different passwords in maybe privacy mode, or you can just prevent cookies entirely and log in anywhere with different credentials. And that's in fact exactly what you would be doing if you just, okay, this particular service requires my name. This particular service requires that I be 18 plus. This particular service requires me to, I don't know, have a credit rating of X plus. You generate a particular identifier for this service, you generate another identifier for this service, you generate another identifier for the other one. And now the only thing that you have to do is show to the one in which you're picking credentials from that you own all those identifiers. So if you remember the did document, I can show this to you. This is going to take a long time. There it is. If you remember, the did document has a controller, right? So if you can prove that you control this particular did, you can generate any number of these you wish, and you're effectively your own root of trust. You're effectively your own root certificate authority, let's say. That's the exact same concept. So you can use this to mitigate the risk of being tracked, let's say, over all the services that you visit. You have a question?
Yes. What about the issue of reclamation of DIDs? So, for example, some DIDs, it may not actually be a good idea to be able to produce as many as you wish.
Yeah.
And what about if one is lost? It's not as simple as just reclaiming a password.
Yeah, that's actually a huge problem. It's the problem of revocation, and it's the problem of losing your wallet at the same time. So if you look at the spec of these, the ways of doing that are described, but I'll try to describe a new one. In, not new, but a way. So you can put into this document, you can put more fields, right? You can extend this with new fields, and if you can put another one, let's call it recovery. And you're going to say that this recovery did can only be used for particular circumstances, like you're going to make that assumption in the way that you build your system. And you're going to say that this can only be used to invalidate to revoke the usage of this did altogether, like it's not valid anymore. So you can put a new did there, or more. So let's say you put in a list of these, you put in 5, let's say, and these are all your family members. So anytime you lose your wallet, or your phone, worse, at this point in time, you can really just call all of them. Could you please just click a button or two to revoke this did because I lost it? So identity theft would be really hard at that point. But yeah, I think that solves the problem for now, but I feel there's more to it.
But it's more of a problem that then needs to be solved in the end of the person designing the system to include for a loss of DIDs.
Yes. Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Okay, the one that put his hand the highest. Go ahead.
So, how do you make certain that the DID that is provided to you by a customer is the one that the customer owns and not something fetched somewhere?
Well, you have the keys, right? So this is the DID. You present this particular one to the store, right? Just this. You don't present the circles. And it's really hard to just, okay, this is mine. I mean, it's like presenting an identity card without a photograph, right? But the thing is, this resolves to something. What this resolves to is the document, right? And this particular document includes ways to authenticate yourself. So in this case, you have a public key, and you need to possess the private key part to actually authenticate yourself as this particular decentralized identifier. So let's say the store just produces nonsense to you and encrypts this nonsense with this particular public key. You'll need to send the actual nonsense back, decrypted, so that they know that you are who you say you are. And that's really authentication. That's an authentication procedure. And that's what you use to make sure that that person that claims to be the owner of this DID really is the owner of the DID. Yeah, this is going to take way too long. Go ahead. Yeah.
How should Alice administer all her private keys?
Aha. Well, yes, that's the wallet
How many
problem.
does she have?
Well, theoretically, she may have an infinite number of these, right? So there's two options here. either the people who build the system make some sort of wallet, which makes sure that this wallet is safe in some way, and this can be backed up somewhere else, and you trust these people to back it up, which is another matter entirely. Or there might be a market created for this at some point. There might be companies whose sole purpose at some point in time will be to store these for you in a trusted manner and offer you wallets for you to interact with these things. Of course, there's other initiatives to keep this more out of the hands of companies. Especially Tim Berners-Lee is, if you know this name, you might know this name. He's working on a new initiative called Solid, which what he wants to do is pretty much make a little vault of these kinds of very important information, and he wants to make sure that this vault can't be lost in a certain way. So he might want to decentralize this, to put this in some sort of blockchain system, but I'm not really sure how this is going to work. So this is indeed the unsolved problem, by the way. You've put your finger exactly on the... Yeah, so you might have those same companies doing the exact same thing, yeah. Yeah.
What if in this example you want to remain anonymous, or you don't think they need your name for the reasons they have specified?
You just don't give it to them. You simply, you know those OAuth screens that you have? These screens could actually remain almost entirely the same. You just don't give it to them, and you either don't use their service, or you, at that point, if nobody uses their service because they really can't see a reason why you might need some kind of information from them, then you just don't give it to them. And either not use the service, or use another one that really allows you to remain anonymous anyway. Yeah?
So that would mean that I couldn't use your favorite rainforest.
That you couldn't, sir?
Couldn't go to Amazon. Because if Amazon says, I only want to do business with you, but know your name, your birthday, then at some point, some people won't care. Like,
Sure.
People won't care, but my mom won't care. She wouldn't give me,
Sure.
She wouldn't know. So that problem isn't.
Well, no. And also, there are some businesses that really require your information to operate. They require to factuur. How the hell do you say this? And yeah, so they must send you an invoice for the products that you buy. So they require your name and your address, especially if they want to send something to you. So these companies really have an interest in your identity credentials, right? In claims over your identity. And not only do they have an interest, they kind of must use them by law. And of course, there is legislation that allows, not allows, but requires companies to do something called the principle of minimum disclosure, right? So they must use only the minimum set of information required from you to actually do their business. Laws like GDPR here in the EU or HIPAA in the United States, that's exactly what they have in them. So it's our job as citizens to make sure that these laws are applied, and they actually can be applied in a predictable manner in this way. Yeah.
Yeah, you were saying a lot of services currently use Google or Facebook as authentication. Are there like any particular services that, for example, in the Netherlands that already use this DID authentication?
That use DID authentication? Not at the moment. No, not here in the Netherlands. There are some businesses that are starting to, for instance, accept Bitcoin. So this kind of, it's kind of a slow burn for these kinds of systems to get used, right? Because on one side you have these enormous companies that really push for their products to be used. So they have a lot of money behind it to make this happen, right? And on the other hand, you have a completely grassroots kind of movement that wants to decentralize identity, decentralize money, decentralize lots of stuff. So these are in a certain way competing factors. But I have hope that, especially with awareness and pressure from the citizenry of the countries that really are aware that this is happening in the first place, that this may go forward. Yes. Who is? Oh, yes. By the way, you might be aware of the Odyssey hackathon. Really? Nobody? Okay. Largest blockchain hackathon in the world, they claim. And they have a bunch of challenge givers, right? One of these challenges is next generation digital ID, and it's given by the Ministerie van Binnenlandse Zaken, the Ministry of Interior Relations, I suppose. And they pretty much want to incorporate some elements of this inside DigiD, right? So this is a move towards this, and a move towards a better world, really, in my opinion. Anyone else?
Well, since companies make a lot of revenue on selling data to third parties,
Yeah.
and they are enforced by law to use this method, why would they even use it?
That's a good question. The thing is, the only companies that have an interest in using this kind of information for revenue purposes are these particular identity providers. They are the Facebooks of the world, they are the Amazons of the world, they are the Googles of the world. And Microsoft tried as well. They didn't exactly succeed. So yes, they have some of their revenue models focused on the so-called advertising model. The thing is, if you have a system that works just as well and allows other companies to comply to regulation better, then you have something, because then they stop using these services to comply with regulation. So, of course, regulation is always behind in a way, but it's slowly coming there. It's slowly going there. GDPR is a good way to go forward. HIPAA is actually good as well in other sorts of ways. They all have their problems, but in the loop der tijd, in the move of time, we'll see things like this happening. What's the time? Because they may have lunch ready for you. Yeah, so we have 1 minute for the last question, or the end, because I'm being told. Have a good time.